As we listen to this song this morning, we all know the search for meaning in our lives. It's explored by poets, by writers, by philosophers, by movie makers. And all of us individually, at some stage in our lives, are pursuing an understanding of the meaning of life. Nigel Compton, who just sang for us, and his own lyrics echo this search. There's a seam of gold that runs through your life, but you're a chance prospector. You know it's there, and you feel it near at times when you look deeper. But who will be your teacher? There's an untapped well within your soul, but you're a ground diviner who seeks his guidance from the world, but finds himself no nearer. So who will be your leader? You go round and round and round and round and round and round again. It's only yourself you're deceiving. There is the beauty in the sun, all that's been and all that's yet to come. Have you not heard the call of the one who asks you to reach higher? The one who calls us to reach higher is the one who created all that we see around us in the heavens and the earth. In Genesis chapter 1, beginning in verse 1, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over the cattle and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps." God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female. He created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over every living thing that moves on the earth." God created us for relationship and influence through identity. God actually created you for relationship and influence through identity. God created the people that you work with, that you live beside, that you go to school with, university with. God creates every human being for relationship with him and influence through identity. He wants to hang out with us. The Garden of Eden was a place where he hung out with Adam and Eve. God's greatest desire is to hang out with you. God's greatest desire is just to be close to you. We heard that this morning through the worship, that God longs just to be close to us and to do life with us. And he also wants us to hang out with him in his light. He's created a light that helps us to understand our identity, helps us to understand who he is, helps us to understand our place in the world. And so we can either choose to hang out in the light or we can choose to hang out in other places. Unfortunately, God's capacity to hang out with every human being got really messed up when Adam and Eve made a decision to eat of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. Once they ate that fruit, what happened was that disobedience entered into the heart of mankind. And because disobedience entered into our heart, we now have choices about where we're going to hang out. Are we going to hang out in the light of God, or are we going to hang out somewhere else? And so God himself, his heart's desire has always been to do relationship with every human being, to give us influence in the world in which we live, whether it be influence in our family and our neighborhood, whether it be more diverse than that, but there is influence that God has given to you. And we shouldn't diminish that influence. You know, if you're here today and you're a single mother and you're raising a couple of children, your influence is really, really significant for those two kids. And it's no more important than my influence as a leader of this church and a leader of God's people in this city. Our influence is actually designed by God. He is the one who decides the influence that we'll have, and it's just up to us to steward it And we're not to measure how great or small it is. We're just meant to honour him because we're created for relationship with him first of all. And then influenced through identity, through a significance and an understanding of who we actually are in his eyes. And so the dilemma that occurred in the Garden of Eden was that God's capacity to hang out with us was changed by the disobedience of Adam and Eve and then all of our subsequent disobedience. But the other thing that changed was that they made an exchange. Adam and Eve made an exchange in identity. They changed their identity from being sons or children of God to being sinners. They actually made an exchange for the light that God brought to them to live in the darkness of their own understanding. And in that moment, God actually had to add another piece to his character and piece to his personality in the way that he engaged with mankind, where he moved from just being a father to Adam and Eve, and now he's had to add alongside of it being a judge. And so God has been a father to Adam and Eve, but because of what they've chosen to do, he now has to assume the role of a judge. This is a really critical and important piece of information that I'm going to ask you to consider right now. Because you see, the dilemma is that most of our theology and our understanding of God has been influenced by Augustine, who drew his ideas from Plato. And he presented God's judge as being a penal code judge, the sort of judge that we know that Mr. Pistorius faced in South Africa, that other people face here in our own nation, that you do something wrong and you receive a punishment for it. For most of us, that's how we think of God as a judge. Certainly, I would suggest that the majority of people that you work with, you go to school with, you attend university with, you go to playgroups with, that you shop with, if you ask them, what do you understand about God being a judge? They would characterize him as a penal code judge, one who punishes sin. But when you look at who God is, this doesn't stack up. He has punished sin. There is no doubt that he punished sin in Jesus so that we could all be set free. But that is not the primary piece of his character as a judge. In the Old Testament, there's a whole book about judges. You might want to go back and read it over the next week. But if you read that book of Judges, those judges are not penal code judges. They're not punishing people for the wrong that they're doing. What they're doing is two things. They're making things right and they're setting oppressed people free. You see, we have this idea that there's only one form of judgment, and that is punishment for sin. And the gospel has been presented to people around us often through God is angry with you, he's angry with your sin, he wants to punish you for your sin, but he punished Jesus, and if you accept the punishment that Jesus took on himself, then you can be free from the punishment and you can go to heaven. All of that is true. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying it's secondary to the primary message of the Gospels. That message that I just said about a penal code judge is not in the Gospels. Jesus never mentioned it once. And so if he didn't mention it, why do we mention it so often? Well, the reason we mention it so often is because we've been shaped by a theological perspective which comes from Augustine. And I don't have time for a church history lesson here this morning. I'm just going to have to ask you to accept the truth of it. But the reality is, it is not in the Gospels. Jesus never spoke about a penal code judge. He never spoke about his Father as a judge who was angry with mankind and wanted to punish them for sin. You see, the truth is that God is love. He's first and foremost a father. He had to take on the role of being a judge, but he took on the role of being a judge inside of his fatherhood, inside of his love. You know, when I had the privilege of raising our 3 children, I didn't wake up in the morning and sort of look forward to the opportunities where I could punish them for the things that they did wrong. That's not my heart towards them. My heart towards them is to help them to grow up into some of the most fantastic people that ever walked on the face of the earth. Which means at times I did have to punish them, but that was just such a small part of the way that I raised them. The bigger part of how I raised them was that I wanted to help them set things right and release them from the oppression that's in their souls. And you see, this is the thing about God, is that when we come to talk to people about this wonderful God that we've come to know and to serve, when we start talking about sin and the punishment of sin, they close down, and rightly they should close down, because it is not the full gospel of Jesus Christ. It is just a small slither of it. Important as it is, and as significant as it is not the central theme of the Gospels of Jesus and the teachings of Jesus. The central theme of the teaching of Jesus is a loving Father who, as a judge, wants to set things right and set oppressed people free. we have the privilege of presenting the gospel to everybody around us. Unfortunately, many people have presented the gospel to them as being the angry penal code judge who wants to punish them. The privilege we have is to walk with the Holy Spirit in these days and hours to actually present Jesus as he always wanted to be presented, as a loving God. God is love. He is relational. He is relational in the way that he wants to engage with mankind and with humanity. And I know that for some of us, maybe many of us, we actually came to faith through the idea of a penal code judge and wanting to avoid going to hell. But once we sort of got in, we actually decided to discover this wonderful, loving God who wants to set things right and set oppressed people free. When we live in darkness, when we're separated from God, and the 25 years that I had of life where I was not following Jesus, where I chose to live in darkness, that darkness begins to influence me and things don't go right and I begin to get oppressed. When I came to faith, there are a whole bunch of things that hadn't gone right, which Jesus has set right. And there's a whole bunch of oppression in my soul that I brought with me into the kingdom that I no longer have. Why? Because that's who God is. And that's the message of the gospel. And I'm sure it's your experience as well. And once we begin to climb into this truth, we begin to have something to offer the people around us. That is good news. A penal code judge is not good news. And it's why it doesn't turn up in the Gospels. And so the wonder of the times and the age in which we live is that we have an opportunity to do things differently. We have an opportunity not to discount the absolute truth that Jesus was punished for our sins. I'm not at all taking away from that. I'm just saying it's 10% of the story. The 90% of the story is a loving father who took on the role of a judge who sets things right and sets oppressed people free. And we have the privilege of telling that story. In John chapter 12 and verse 46, it says, I have come as light into the world so that everyone who believes in me will not remain in darkness. This is the heart of Jesus. I have come as light into the world so that everyone who believes in me will not remain in darkness. We find that this is Paul's experience in the book of Acts when we read in chapter 26 and verse 12, while so engaged as I was journeying to Damascus with the authority and commission of the chief priests, at midday, O king, I saw on the way a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, shining all around me and those who were journeying with me. And when we had all fallen to the ground, I heard a voice saying to me in the Hebrew dialect, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads. And I said, who are you, Lord? And the Lord said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But get up and stand on your feet. For this purpose I have appeared to you, to appoint you a minister and a witness, not only to the things which you have seen, but also to the things which I will appear to you, in which I will appear to you, rescuing you from the Jewish people and from the Gentiles to whom I'm sending you, to open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light, from the dominion of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and an inheritance amongst those who have been sanctified by faith in me. This whole issue of helping people come to faith is about helping them to go on a journey out of a dark place and into a light place. It's about giving them something of hope that says there is a God who loves you and he wants to set things right and set you free from those things that are troubling you. That's the good news of the gospel. What I've discovered is that once people actually invite Jesus, when people invite Jesus in on the basis of setting things right and setting oppressed people free, the forgiveness of sins just comes with the package. It's part of the deal. But in this generation, if we present in this relativistic generation of universalism where everybody's truth is equally valid, when we talk about sin and an angry God who wants to punish them for their sin, they switch off and they go, why is your morality any better to my reality? When we do that, we only present 10% of the gospel. The 90% that Jesus presented, if you read through the Gospels, go and read the book of Judges. Make it your purpose to read the book of Judges and the Gospels over the next month before Christmas. And I challenge you in both of those places to find a penal code judge who wants to punish people for their sin. The Jesus that I serve presented a father who, as a judge, wanted to set things right. And that's what he's done for me. Over 30 years of walking with him, he has set so many things right. So many things that I stuffed up. So many things where in the darkness of my own understanding, I thought I knew what I was doing, but it was only causing damage that I regretted. And he set it right because he's so good. And he set the oppression in my soul free, the motivations that led me to do things. He's come to me with gentleness and kindness and patience, and he's actually come to talk to me about those things, and over time he's helped me to overcome them. And this is your story as well, and this is the story that we are called to tell. This is the good news that we have for the people around us. And this is why Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9, he says, "But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession." We often hear that piece, but the second piece is equally, if not more important. So that. There's a reason why we've been chosen. There's a reason why we're a royal priesthood. Not to strut around and feel arrogant, so that you may proclaim who? You, me, us, individually. You may proclaim what? The excellencies of him, which is what I've just been trying to describe. The excellencies of him who has called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. That's my privilege. That's my role. That's your privilege. That's our role. For those of us who have discovered the light of God, our role is to proclaim the excellencies of him who has called us out of darkness. I don't think it's an excellent thing to tell people actually the God that we serve really is ticked off with his sin. And once you get that bit right, once you accept that he punished Jesus, then we can talk about all the good things. No, there's a bunch of other things that I can talk about. And I can talk about them just gently and quietly, without fear of recrimination, because I know them to be true, whether they're accepted as truth or not. That you may proclaim the excellencies of him who has called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. Let me say this to you this morning. Someone proclaimed his excellencies to you and invited you to come out of darkness and into light.